Now that you're here at Grief to Growth, I'd like to ask you to do three things. The first thing is to make sure that you like, click notifications, and subscribe to make sure you get updates from my YouTube channel. Also, if you'd like to support me financially, you can support me through my tip jar at grief2growth.com. It's grief, the number 2, growth.com/tip jar. Or look for tip jar at the very top of the page or buy me a coffee at the very bottom of the page, and you can make a small financial contribution. The third thing I'd like to ask is to make sure you share this with a friend through all your social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Thanks for being here. Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth, and I have a really great guest for today. I'm sure you guys are going to be excited to meet her. Her name is Carrington Smith. She's written a book called Blooming, and I'm going to read her bio, and then I'll bring her in, and we'll just start having a conversation. I think she and I have a lot in common. This should be interesting. The book Blooming is candid and raw. It takes you on a treasure hunt to discover the gifts in the shit. Shit is quite literally fertilizer. It's in the messes, the failures, the trauma, and difficulties of life that we discover what we need to bloom into our greatness. So from trauma to triumph, through the depth of sexual assault, religious mindfuckery, these are Carrington's words, family rejection, body dysmorphia, midlife metamorphosis, physical scarring, and death into happiness, forgiveness, empathy, purpose, belonging, and joy. Blooming is a poignant, powerful account of finding your way through the shit. Carrington is a single mom. She's an attorney. She's a business owner, and she's an executive search professional. And despite being born with a silver spoon in her mouth, life gave her a hard kick in the tail. And she survived sexual assault, 2 divorces, piles of debt, abuse, religious mind games, the death of loved ones, and the loss of close friends. So in her best-selling debut memoir, which is what we're going to talk about today, she combines wit and wisdom to share her journey through the shit with a positive attitude and a shift of mindset into a life bursting with joy, opportunity, and purpose. So with that, I want to welcome to Grief to Growth, Carrington Smith.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having the conversation. We were talking before I hit the record button that we do seem to have a lot in common in our philosophies of life, and some of the things we've been through have been kind of similar too. So, yeah. Tell me about your life. You it sounds like you were born kind of with the silver spoon in your mouth, but you've gone through quite a bit between there and where you are now.
Yeah. Well, so part of the reason I claim that, being born with a silver spoon in my mouth is I think people make judgments based on sort of that initial, like, oh, it looks like she lives this fabulous life. And they're 95% of the time incorrect, these judgments, that people make about people. So yeah, I was born into a family that my great-great-grandfather founded International Paper Company. I had another grandparent that had a seat on the New York Stock Exchange, founded multiple banks, multiple companies, hung out with, the Astors, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts. I mean, they had the houses like on Long Island, like the Great Gatsby. I mean, it was that kind of life they lived. And by the time you get to my generation, some parts of my family still had money, but in particular, none of that got to me. And so I was expected to live up to the standards of that background. So there were extremely high standards as far as academics, and a lot of my family was very athletic. So athletic achievement and social standing were the things that were emphasized, but I didn't have any of the emotional or financial, psychological support to achieve any of those things. So in my particular family, my parents became fundamentalist Christians. I know we have that background in common.
Mhm.
And with those beliefs, my father believed that the firstborn son, which was my brother, should get, preference for most everything, and he did. And then my sister was the firstborn daughter, and I was the baby, or the runt of the litter. So my sister was given a lot of things I wasn't given. And just to kind of help people understand the stark contrast, my sister went to this boarding school that my grandmother and my mother went to. It's Oprah Winfrey sent, I think, one of her nieces or something there.
Hmm.
It is, to this day, the most elite all-female boarding school in the world. And so it was very important to my grandmother and mother that my sister go, but they took a look at me and said, yeah, not Carrie. So my sister, so she could go there, they asked me to transfer to public school. So I went to public school with, Everett is this very industrial town. So, some Boeing people, because that's also where one of the big Boeing plants are, but some pretty, blue collar folks. And my sister was hanging out with the private jet crew. So on her weekends, they would use one of her friends' private jets to go somewhere. So, we're 18 months apart in age, coming from the same family, but our lives could not have been more different. And then when she graduated from boarding school, she went to USC in Southern California, the University of Spoiled Children. And my parents asked me to go in state because they were paying for my brother at Stanford and my sister at USC. And so I was asked, or actually asked is putting it nicely, I was told that I was going to go in state. So I chose to go to Washington State University. We were living in Seattle at the time, and attended there for a couple of years so that we could pay for my brother and sister. So that kind of helps you give people a little bit of understanding. And then when I was at Washington State, I was raped. And that it's actually the first story I write about in the book. And it kind of helps unfold a lot of my life philosophies and how that event, that trauma, how I processed it, and how I've actually learned to use it to serve me now. So.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you got off to a kind of a rough start in life, and so what is it that helped you to turn that around? At what point did you say, I'm going to do something with this?
Well, I think part of it is, as we're growing up, we put our parents on a pedestal, and we think that everything that they say is true and right, and that they are they are sort of like gods to us. And for me, it took years of having a lot of really bad things happen, really at the hands of my parents: neglect, abuse, being compared to my siblings negatively, favoritism, not being there when I was raped, not being there to support me, in fact, rejecting me because of it. Learning to finally grasp the fact that these things were what they were. I think a lot of times we just think that's how we're treated and that's what we deserve, but actually being able to put a label on it, and someone said, you were neglected or you were abused. And it was like, I was. Helping to put a label on it really helped me then to heal from it and move on. And I went through a lot of therapy, a lot of dark days, a lot of depression. But I think doing the hard work, and always looking to grow and get better. That's just that seed, that core desire to get to the other side helps you seek out therapy. But it was really those moments when I was looking back on the events that happened to me that I had one of the big epiphanies that helped me move forward. And so let me just give you an example.
Sure.
My father, being a fundamentalist Christian, he actually thought he was a prophet. And we went from, we started out Episcopalian, and he ended up, he now has a home church. So there was a whole arc there of progression. He was a very scary guy, physically, but even more so mentally, getting in your head and using scriptures, twisting scriptures to make you feel less than and to manipulate you to do what he wanted. But I grew up walking on eggshells and really living in fear of my father. And someone asked me, this was, probably 15 years ago, what is one of your greatest gifts? And that was easy. I was like, intuition. Like some people suggest I was psychic. I don't think that, but my intuition is so fine-tuned. I can walk in a room and pick up on so many things that it won't even register with other people. And they asked me, well, where do you think you got that gift? And I thought about it, and I said, I got that gift from walking on eggshells. It was my childhood was my training ground for this gift of intuition. It was a survival skill, right? So I had to constantly be aware of everything happening around me and pick up on things that other people couldn't in order to navigate my childhood. That conversation made me realize that if I was grateful for the gift of intuition, I must also be grateful for the path that birthed it. I could not separate those two things. And in that moment, I suddenly had gratitude for my past. And it just was it was a shift for me. I then began to go back and look at these other shitty, horrible experiences and say, well, what other gifts are there buried there? What else can I claim from these experiences that I've had? And I uncovered things like, grit, emotional resilience, collaboration, leadership, just all these different life skills that came out of the hardest events in my life. And understanding that, it also helped my mindset change so that now, as horrible things happen, my eye is on what am I getting out of this? Where is the opportunity in the adversity, or where is the gift in this? And so as bad things happen, it's a mindset. So here, I'll give you another quick example.
Sure.
If you say you get a flat tire, you're stuck in the highway, flat tire, you call AAA, your day is shot, you're going to be stuck out there waiting for an hour. Most people are like, my day's gone to hell, this sucks, I'm screwed. That's where their head goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
With this shift in mindset, when something like that happens, I immediately go, there's a gift in here somewhere. How do I view this event? Instead of viewing it as, gosh, flat tire, I got to buy a new tire, blah, blah, blah. It's, wow, I have the gift of an extra hour in my day. I got pulled out of this crazy hamster wheel that I've been on. God made me stop and take stock. I have an hour now to call that friend I've been meaning to talk to. I have an hour now to listen to that podcast I've been meaning to listen to. These are the gifts. So as opposed to focusing on, oh, my day is screwed, my mind immediately goes to, what's the opportunity here? What's the gift? What am I meant to reflect on because this just happened to me? And it becomes, mindset's a muscle. So my brain has now become trained that every time something bad happens, I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to get out of this? What's the lesson? Let me learn it quickly so I don't have to go through this more than once, right?
Right. So I'm curious, when you started to make the shift, because you said you were raped in college, and I think you had some financial issues and stuff
Yes.
too. So when did you make the shift on your own? Was it something that just came to you? Were you in therapy, or how did you end up doing this?
Well, with therapy for me, that really came down to sort of deprogramming. I had this negative tape that was constantly being triggered. The minute something bad happened or there was any kind of negative inference towards me, I would just go into this downward spiral of self-hatred and self-loathing. And what therapy did for me was help move me from that tape to a internal dialogue that was more about self-love than self-flagellation. And as I learned to talk to myself or have an internal dialogue that was more positive and more caring and more supportive to myself, it helped me let go of a lot of my anger and move from anger and focusing on myself and what had been done to me to self-love and looking outward to what I could do for others and having empathy for others. So there's literally like this spectrum of, self-hatred, anger, what was done to me, to self-love, what I can do for others, empathy, joy, purpose. And it was a journey. I mean, it's not something that just was a snap moment. It was doing the hard work, facing those things. As I like to say, you have to reach rage to reach forgiveness. Get angry about what happens, feel it, but let it pass through you so you don't hold on to it. I think that's where people get stuck. They either deny that they're angry or upset, say, I want to pretend this didn't happen to me, big mistake. Or they stay in the anger or the muck and sit in it. You have to let it move through you. Feel it, acknowledge it, but let it move through you so then you can get to the other side, which is forgiveness, happiness, empathy, joy.
Yeah, I think that is just, wow, such a huge revelation. And like you, I went to therapy. I was probably close to 40 by the time I got around to it. But my life just was not working for me. I was having panic attacks, and the religious stuff was, I was like, I thought I was a bad person and God didn't love me and all this kind of stuff. And what you just say, I remember my therapist saying this to me. She's like, you have to feel those feelings that I denied when I was a child, the things that I didn't get, because I always just said, well, I didn't really deserve them, or they did the best they could. And, those were the things I was telling myself. And she said, but as a 5-year-old, you didn't know that. And that's what really kind of opened my eyes up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so, so true. Yeah.
So I'm curious about your religious, your spirituality, and where you are on that journey now, having come through that, or how did you process that?
Well, boy, that was hard. Where I am today is I consider myself spiritual, not religious. I know we have that in common. I feel like religion is a trap that people use to impose their beliefs, morals, values, whatever, on others, and to cause shame or create shame or other negative things.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that God is a loving God. And I always go back, to me, the most central thing is I think of Jesus and how he was the person who loved the least of them. And that's who he chose to hang out with, and how he threw out the tax collectors and the Pharisees, and those people made him angry. And that helps give me clarity about who he is and what he's about. And the most essential and important verse in the Bible is love thy neighbor as thyself. And I hold on to that. So when people judge other people, I'm like, God told us not to judge. He told us to love. And so when people use religion to judge other people, I'm like, wait a second, that's fundamentally wrong. So I have just landed at a place where I have a great relationship with God, but it's about love, and it's about showing up for other people and spreading joy, making a difference in people's lives in whatever small way I can, whether that's a smile or a compliment or a prayer or a gift or, whatever it is, a kind word. But, it was a long way to get there. I mean, my father loved to manipulate scripture. And one of the scriptures that was his favorite was the commandment that we were to honor our father and mother.
Yeah, they love that one, don't they?
Don't they? And what he would say is, it's the only command that comes with a promise. And that is, if you honor your mother and father, you'll have a long life. And he twisted that to say, and likewise, it also comes with a curse. So if you don't honor your mother and father, your life will be cut short. And so he actually sent me what I refer to as the demand letter, where he laid out all of his demands for what I was to do to honor him. And it was a very specific list. Of this point, I was an adult. He was like, each one of you 3 kids needs to host us for holidays. And, you need to make sure you give us gifts. And like, it was like a whole list. But what was so paramount that came out of that letter was that there was a curse. And I got the letter before my brother and sister, and I picked up the phone and I called them. I said, burn it. Don't open it. It's evil. Because it's the kind of thing that gets in your head and you can't get rid of, right?
Yeah,
it just eats at you. And that's just an example of what he would do. But it was constant, where he would use scripture to manipulate behavior. So
yeah, and that's I've gone through toxic religion. I work with someone where we talk to people all the time about it, and it's just amazing how the thing that's supposed to teach us to love and bring us together can actually be manipulated, as you said, to do the opposite.
yeah,
And as you were talking about that letter that your father wrote, it just reminds me of, you talk about the law. This is literally him laying down the law
yeah.
to his adult child. But I guess at this point you'd had enough self-confidence that you were able to put that aside.
Yeah, his behavior, I guess in some ways, his wild behavior helped, because he had actually sat me down and had this like 3-hour dinner where he told me he was a prophet. And that when I got to heaven, God was going to affirm that, because I was clearly like, yeah, right, Dad. And his behavior had gotten wild enough that I was like, okay, this guy, he's out there. So that kind of helped a little bit. But yeah, I mean, when you have it constantly in your head, drummed into your head for 17, 18 years of your life, of just this toxicity and these crazy beliefs, it's really hard to step away from that. And it was after that letter, I divorced that first husband, I was on my second husband, that my therapist said, look, I really think that you would benefit from daily on the couch psychoanalysis. So 5 days a week on the couch for a year. And that was really talking through these beliefs, that these crazy beliefs, and help. She just would kind of ask questions. She was great. I mean, she would make me think about what I was saying, and I'd go, wait a second, that doesn't make sense, and you kind of gradually, and you do sort of build self-esteem for that process, because you realize on your own that, okay, this isn't right. And I did arrive at my own set of, I mean, I believe in God, but I believe in a loving God. And so I just eschew all of that crazy, if you don't, stand on your head and clap 3 times or whatever it is, whatever religion tells you to do, forget it. That's not what God's about. So,
Carrie, it's hard for people that haven't been through this to understand it. And I'm in a group on Facebook for people that have gone through this. And sometimes people that haven't, they're in the group and they're like, well, why would you ever believe that crazy stuff? But it goes back to what you said at the very beginning. When we're young children, we look at our parents as gods. I mean, we literally look at them as like all knowing, and all the adults know everything, and they give this stuff, and people don't understand that programming becomes a part of you, and you feel like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when that starts to fall away, how did that feel to you when you started to say these beliefs aren't real?
I mean, you start to feel a little crazy, right? I mean, I did. My father, we weren't even allowed to question his beliefs at all. So when you get out there in college and then later in law school, finding out that there were different viewpoints and what they were, I was kind of like, I really mentally was lost. I couldn't make sense of the things that I'd been taught. they just didn't, and there was so much inconsistency in them too, because he was constantly changing them.
Mhm.
So I just couldn't make sense of what I've been told. So that kind of helped to put me on a journey of kind of figuring out what really mattered to me and what was important. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You don't even realize until you get to a certain point that the things that you're believing are contradictory.
Yeah.
The God is love, but he's going to send all these people to hell for eternity.
Right.
And somehow people hold both these ideas in their heads at the same time, until, like you said, you get to the point where you start to question it. But then for me, it's kind of like a house of cards. When you start to pull that one thing out, then the whole thing kind of collapses. And that we call that process deconstruction. And that can be a very scary process, which a lot of people avoid. They just say, I'm just going to gloss this over. I'm not going to question.
Yeah. Well, I think a big part of it for me was also developing friendships with people that I hadn't previously even been exposed to,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing, like, my father's beliefs, I couldn't reconcile that God could believe what my father said he believed about. I have so many gay friends. And he was very homophobic, or he was homophobic. He was anti-gay.
Mm-hmm.
He, I mean, his beliefs, I couldn't make sense of them. I just couldn't see, when God loved the least of them, why he would then discard these people. I couldn't reconcile. I mean, so I have extremely diverse friends from all kinds of walks of life, ethnicity, color, background, sexuality. And, my perspective is just to love. So.
Yeah, well, like I said, that they have these contradictory beliefs that they put on us, and then with the big thing, don't question, because questioning is bad too. So it's built in. It's a kind of a trap that, and I want people to understand, when people look at you today, and I understand a little bit of the process that you've been through. That, as you said, it's a process. It's not something that slips overnight. I heard you say you were in therapy for a long time, and
Yeah.
I tell people it's a practice. It's a daily practice to break those things. And it's still, sometimes you're like, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they were right. That little voice in the back of your head.
Well, I have to say, for me, the most pivotal moment in my journey was when I stopped speaking to my father and cut him out of my life entirely. This man who claims to be a Christian and tells everyone else he knows who Christians are, like, he'll judge and say, well, they're not a Christian. He wrapped his hands around my son's neck and tried to strangle him. And that moment, I was like, the mama bear comes out, right? And I am like, you don't mess with my kids. You've done enough to me.
Right.
You don't touch my kids. And so I was like, to my son, I was like, you never have to see that man ever again. He's not part of our life anymore. He's out. And I have to say, I wish someone had done that for me. I had a grandmother that was equally toxic, and I was constantly paraded in front of her because they wanted me to get her money and favor and whatever. And I was subject to some really just horrible treatment. And I was like, I don't care. This is my kid. You don't get to touch him psychologically, physically, spiritually, bye. And that's when I was like, I am done with you. And when I closed that door and set that firm boundary, I finally myself could heal. What I came to realize is that these constant interactions with people that cause us these, terrors and issues and thoughts about that just make us feel bad. It's like an open wound that every time you interact with them, it's like the scab is picked off. It can never heal until you completely close the door and say goodbye, and they have no access. That was when I finally began to heal. And that total separation helped me also to really go on more of a journey and embrace. I was like, look, all of that was toxic and bad. And I want to create a loving, supportive environment for my children. And how do I do that? And what are we going to stand for? And what are we going to be about? And so that journey as well kind of helped me get to where I am.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely important point, because sometimes, especially again with the religious background, we're taught, forgive. We have to forgive and forgive
Right.
it. And I'm a big believer in forgiveness, but I'm also a big believer in boundaries.
Yes.
Because we forgive someone doesn't mean we have to take abuse from that person.
Right. And I think that one of the challenges in society today is people feel like particularly the parent-child relationship, they're like, oh, well, he's your dad. Can't you just forgive him? He's your dad, or she's your mom. Short of them being a murderer or a child molester, very few times do your friends or social circle give you the grace to say, no, I've had enough, because they make this judgment that relationship is more important than anything possible negative they could be doing in your life. Mm-hmm. And I am here to tell the world, if they can take one thing away from this, is you have permission to protect yourself and save your sanity. And it is okay to create a boundary between whatever a toxic person, whether that's a parent or a sibling or a grandparent or a close friend or whoever it is. You have permission to create that boundary, to separate yourself and heal. It is okay. And do not let anyone in your social circle or society tell you otherwise or make you feel guilty for creating that boundary. By creating that boundary, I could finally forgive my father when he was constantly offending and picking at me. All I felt was rage and anger. And I could heal and forgive. And forgiveness is the greatest gift you can give yourself.
Wow. I've got goosebumps as you said that. I mean, you just said that so perfectly, because people, again, they misunderstand this idea of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not for the other person. It's for ourselves.
Yes.
As long as we're carrying that anger is toxic to us. And as you said, sometimes in extreme situations, and I would say your father is an extreme situation, you've got to draw a hard boundary where it's like, yeah, no, I can't do this anymore. And that person sounds like he's not likely to change. And I love what you said about the mama bear too. There's something about our kids that really triggers us, right? Because it's like, we're going to protect our kids at all costs. Yeah. For me, one of the things was when my daughter was born, because I was hearing about this guy that, supposedly loves us, but sends us to hell and blah, blah, blah. And I looked at my daughter and I was like, okay, she could never do anything that I would punish, that I would be angry with her. I mean, I might be angry, but I would turn my back on her for it. Never, right. No matter what she did, I would never turn my back on her. And if God supposedly loves me more than I love my child, then how could this be possibly true? And so that I remember that moment when I looked at my daughter and I'm like, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.grief2growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF2GROWTH to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Yeah.
So, I was going to ask what your relationship with your father is like now, but it sounds like you've decided that, that's it. So
it's over.
You have no relationship with them.
Yeah. And I'm the happiest I've ever been. Candidly, I'm the most at peace. I think a lot of times we carry around these emotions. They're so toxic to us physically.
Right.
I'm the most relaxed and at peace within not just my mind, but my physical body. I mean, I feel that I've released these emotions and let them go. And it's been a journey, but I know that I'm in the right place. And I have two very healthy, well-adjusted, beautiful boys, one about to go to college, the one about to go after him. And they know that their parents love them, even though we're divorced. They know they've got two loving and supportive parents who work well together to co-parent, and they have a support structure. They never have to wonder if we're going to show up for them.
Wow, that's fantastic. I also wanted to ask you, because I know you talk openly about being sexually assaulted, and I know that that's a lot more common than a lot of us would like to believe. So what advice do you have for women who have gone through that and as to how to deal with it?
Yeah. Well, the first piece of advice I have is, so in my situation, I was told that I could not talk about it. And I listened to my mother and my sorority sister and didn't talk about it. And so for 6 years, I didn't speak about it. And during that time period, I became very depressed. Before that point, I had been very straight-laced. I became promiscuous after I was raped. I was reenacting the event. As I like to say, I became the messenger for the message that I had received from the rapist. And I just kept reliving that trauma. They say that trauma is the monster under the bed. If you don't deal with it, it will own you. I did not know that. And what happened is it did own me. I mean, for 6 years of my life, it owned me. When I finally, and the first time I ever really talked about the rape, I wrote a short story. It's the first story I ever wrote about my life. I wrote about the rape, and I did that to share with someone to help them understand why I was behaving oddly. And that just opened up for me, learning that I could write. What I love about writing versus telling stories is there's no opportunity for someone to interrupt and interject with their filters and opinions. And a lot of times our friends tend to minimize our feelings, which is so unhealthy, or reject them wholeheartedly, or say it wasn't that bad. When you write, you can just say, these are my feelings. This is what happened to me. This is my perspective. And there's no judgment when you write. There may be feedback later.
Right.
But in that moment, it's unfiltered, and there's no pressure to change how you're feeling. And so what I learned from being raped was, it was really critical to face it and deal with it. But as I went through my journey, and I write about this, I really hope people do pick up the book, because this is one of the best chapters. I feel like it's the most helpful for anybody who's been through this, because I literally take the reader on a journey of how I went through this and what books I read, what shows I watched, all of that, how I arrived at where I am today. But I came to a place of realizing that if we look at the shit in our life, the traumas, the failures, the difficulties, being sexually assaulted, and we actually, instead of trying to hide it and saying it's not going to define us, we actually claim it and say, okay, this happened to me. And then use this horrible thing that happened to you as a springboard to propel you forward, and take what's happened to you and reshape it, make it your own, and use it for your own purposes. And by doing that, I've been able to take something that was so horrible and turn it around into something that actually propels me forward through life. So,
wow, that's profound. I mean, because I think people misunderstand things, and they, as you just said, sometimes people will say, I'm not going to let this define me. So we kind of deny it. We deny the impact it had on us. We deny the importance it has in our life. Whereas you've taken it and you've integrated it, which is the exact opposite of denying it. I'm going to take this and I'm going to look for the gift in it. And I know that word, I know it bothers a lot of people to say that there's a gift in something like that. But it's something that you've decided to claim. You've made the gift. It doesn't come with it automatically. You had to claim it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have, see, that's part of this story is you have to own your shit. You
Yeah.
have to go back and look at it, and don't just keep pushing it out of the way. Say, yeah, that happened. I'm not going to think about it anymore. There are diamonds in there. There are gifts. There are diamonds. Like, if you don't go back and look at it and say, what do I need to learn from this experience? You're going to keep reliving it. I mean, that's one thing that's for sure true about life. If you don't figure out the story or the gift that God intended for you from that experience, you're going to keep having those experiences because God really wants you to have that gift. And so I like to say, when something bad happens, I immediately go there. Okay, God, what is it that's here for me in this? The opportunity, the gift, what is it? Let's find out quickly, because this hurt. This sucked.
Yeah.
Acknowledge the pain, but say, okay, as I'm processing that pain and moving through it, my eye is always on the prize.
So these things that happen in our life, and I always hesitate to use the word bad, because whether something is good or bad is really a matter of our perspective. So
100%.
we get to decide whether it's good or bad. But these things that happen to us, what is your belief? Is it soul planning? Is it God sending it to us? Or what is your belief about that?
Ooh, I don't know that I've actually arrived at a belief on that. I do believe it's about perspective. One of the things that I kind of teach is it's about these daily choices that determine the outcome of our life. Thoughts precede actions and outcomes. And so I see this all the time. My ex-husband, something goes bad and he's like, I'm screwed. My day's ruined. That's where he goes. Something happens to me and I go, okay, that sucked. How am I going to make my day turn out better? Where's the gift in it? How do I immediately go to strategizing and glass half full. And so it's totally that mental perspective that does determine things. And one of my favorite stories, it's in the book, is I went to Vegas with a friend and we wanted to see the fountains at the Bellagio. And so we made a reservation at the time it was a restaurant called Olives that had a patio overlooking the fountains. And we had just finished our dinner, watching the beautiful fountains, and the tables had umbrellas. But I just finished, so I stood up to get away from my table. My friend was still sitting down. And just at that moment, a massive gust of wind comes through, hits one of the fountains and carries it over and hits me like a tidal wave. And I was drenched. I mean, drenched it's like someone took a fire hose to me. I mean, from head to toe. And my girlfriend looks at me with expectation, like, like, what's she going to do? And I realized in that split second that I had a choice to make that was going to determine the outcome for our evening. So in that second, I said, what are the odds of getting hit by a fountain at the Bellagio?
Yeah.
They were saying, no, this has never happened before. And I was like, it's never happened before. I'm the lucky one. I said, I've been baptized by the holy water. We're going to win tonight. And so my response was that. So we quickly, I blew dry my hair, changed my clothes. We're out the door. It was one of the best nights I've ever had in Las Vegas. But it was that split second choice of how I was going to view that event that determined the outcome of that evening. It could have gone a completely different direction. I mean, I could have just thrown a fit, gotten angry, asked to talk to the manager, it could have just gone the other direction. But instead, I saw it as a blessing.
And you talked about this already, but I want to emphasize this point to people, because someone might look at you and say, well, that's just Carrie. I can't be like that. And I would have said this 6 or 7 years ago myself. It is a practice. It's something that you have to actually work on a daily basis. And as you so brilliantly point out, there's a choice. There's a choice at every moment as to how we perceive the things that happen to us. And I asked you the question, about how you believe it happens, because people always go there. It's like, well, is it soul planning, or did God do it, or or whatever? And your answer, I think, was great. It's like, it doesn't really matter. It's how you perceive it.
Yeah.
And that's your choice. And that's what that's not even a belief. That's something that you make happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Every single day, 100 times throughout the day, we are making these decisions that determine our mood, and the mood then determines, how we perform, which determines our relationships, which determines, it's these little micro decisions that happen throughout the day. And it's like to say, it's a muscle. It's that constant practice of stopping and going, I can choose how I perceive this. Maybe I'm going to look at it from a different direction.
Yeah, well, again, that is great how you've developed that muscle, over these years. And you talked about the things that happened to you when you were younger, the resilience. I think you used the word grit.
Yeah.
That you developed that you wouldn't have had if you had been in different circumstances.
Yep, absolutely.
So I know another thing you talk about in your book is body dysmorphia. And
Yes.
so what message do you have for people that are struggling with that?
Oh, empathy, I guess, is the first thing. It's funny because, I'm Gen X. We were raised with Cheryl Tiegs, who was known as Twiggy, right? So it was all about being skinny and not having any curves. And obviously you guys can't really see, but I'm 5'3" and very curvy. And so I just felt shame. And my father just completely, enhanced that by telling me that I wasn't pretty. Yes, affirmatively saying you're not pretty.
Wow.
And I had some other life experiences that just kind of added on to that. And so I just was, constantly just feeling out of sorts, and I couldn't wear any of the same clothes as my friends, and was always having to get alterations. And I laugh about this now because I had liposuction of my hips, thighs, and buttocks back in 1999. And I told somebody that recently, and they were horrified. They were like, why would you do that? Why would you reduce the size of your hips, thighs, and butt?
Yeah.
Everybody's getting butt implants now. And I'm like, well, this was what the standard was. You were supposed to be skinny and have no curves. And so I was trying to become that person. Now, it made me a little less curvy, but the curves are still there. And so part of my journey, and I'm very grateful, honestly, to these body positive people who suddenly made, my figure more popular. But, it's just coming to look at your body differently and realize it's an instrument that's here to, perform certain things. It's not about just being, whatever society's idea of beauty is at that moment. And I think partly with aging, I've realized it's like, wow, like my knees and ankles and hips are great. I'm not going to need any hip replacements or anything anytime soon. I'm healthy. I'm vibrant. I'm, physically in shape. My body helps me do all these things. And so, partly, it's also, I think, for immunity's sake, telling your body how you're taking good care of it and thanking it for taking good care of you and developing a different relationship with it. So I am not perfect. I still have issues. This is probably one of the issues that will battle me, for the rest of my life. I think there's just so much out there as far as beauty, but I do like to say it's an Instagram world and I'm living life unfiltered. So yeah. What you see is what you get. I am scarred. I have cellulite. But you know what? I'm grateful for the body that I have. So.
Yeah. Well, again, it's that shift. It's that shift as, not looking at the negative, so-called negative part of our bodies, but the fact that my body's functioning. And the older I get, the more I'm grateful for the fact that my body just, still relatively works, right? I can get up and
no, seriously. Yeah.
So it's that making that, because the world will send us these messages. This is what we've been talking about this whole time. The world's telling us we're not enough. Our parents, our religion, society, your body's not good enough. You're not a good enough person. And so I love your journey that you've gone within to find that inner strength and bring it out and practice it and really put it out there for everybody to see.
Yeah. I literally have a dialogue with my butt and whatnot. So it's like, I thank my thighs. Like, thank you. Thank you for helping me to walk. Thank you for giving me the strength. I have very strong legs. It's like, so it's changing that dialogue.
Yes. And it's funny because I tell my clients sometimes, about talking to yourself, because we always say, well, it's not good to talk to yourself, but I like talk to yourself. Give yourself positive self-talk. I just did a short course on people pleasing. And the thing about people that are people pleasers, it's because we do it because we're looking for praise.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what if we started praising ourselves?
Yes.
What if we started thanking ourselves for, like you said, thanking your body and really realizing that, you are a resilient person and telling yourself that if no one else does.
Yeah. In the end, this is where, and this is an important reminder for me too. I've been single for a while now, married and divorced twice, been single for a while. And somebody said to me recently, you came into the world alone and you're leaving the world alone. So you might as well figure out how to be alone. And while in some ways that's kind of sad, I was like, wow, that's so important about the ability just to be content with yourself in your own space. And part of that, again, is having that internal dialogue of nourishment and support and love, because you can't count on that always to come from somewhere else. So it needs to come from within.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about, being alone. I mean, you have kids and I'm sure family and friend. You talked about your friends and stuff. So this idea that we have to be paired up, that's another thing society, tells us. And if you're not, you're alone. But as you said, the one person that you can count on, the only person you can count on is yourself.
Yeah.
To give yourself that positive self-talk and all that stuff. That's the number one thing. And people that go searching for that from someone else, that other person is not necessarily reliable.
Exactly. So true.
So you also help people. I know you're executive recruiter. So what advice do you have for people that are in careers looking to make changes, or what's your career advice for people?
Well, I think a lot of people just wait for that opportunity to come along. They kind of look to see, what the job openings are, or if a headhunter calls them, and there's not really any direction. And I really ascribe to the belief that you should begin with the end in mind, meaning, where do you want to end up? If you're going to paint a picture, if you're going to write a story of what your life looks like 5 to 10 years from now, what does that look like? And so if you want to be, CEO of a company, or you want to, whatever it is you want to be, what kind of life you want to lead, as opposed to waiting for someone to come along and offer you that next step in your career, say, okay, if this is where I want to be, how do I get there? What do I need to get there? And I encourage people to do things like do informational interviews. People, a lot of times when you ask for advice, they will actually come back and they say, ask for advice, they'll give you money, ask for money, they'll give you advice. When you go on an informational interview, they're likely to say, hey, when an opportunity opens up, maybe this is someone I should put in that opportunity. So learning about where you want to go, figuring out a path, and then being much more directed about it and saying, okay, if I want to get to this place, there's these 5 places maybe that I could make pit stops at. I need to network with these people, and being strategic and directed as opposed to just kind of waiting for life to happen to you. I mean, I've always lived my life that way. And I feel like if more people did, they would be much more satisfied in their careers. And part of that is, when I say where you want to end up, I'm talking about, let's paint this whole picture. And that is, I only want to work so many hours a day. This is the kind of area I want to live in. I want to have my family around, like really paint the picture so that when you're given the opportunity to go work someplace and slave away for however many years, eventually you'll get that brass ring. If that doesn't meet your picture of what, if you're not willing to give up that quality of life to get there, that's not the opportunity for you. And you're going to be unhappy if you take it. So it's really having a dialogue with yourself, figuring out what it is you want to do, and then getting out there and asking questions, doing research and planning. Okay, if I want to get to here, these are the steps I need to take to get there, and being deliberate about it.
Yeah, well, obviously you've been very deliberate about your life, and it's good that you're giving people that advice, because I think a lot of us, we are too passive about our lives, and we just kind of let things happen to us. And you can take the reins and you can start making these plans. And I like what you said, but also it's about lifestyle, not just not just whatever the job is or whatever the compensation is. And a lot of us don't realize that until too late.
Yes.
We're nearing retirement. We've realized that we've missed watching our kids grow up, because we were on the road the entire time, or we were working 60 hours a week. And so taking all those things into consideration.
Absolutely critical. I mean, I've passed on a lot of job opportunities in order to stay in a situation where I have daily interaction with my kids. I mean, I created a life for myself where, I could be working when they were babies. I could be working 1 minute and breastfeeding the next, and then hand the baby back. I mean, I created a life for myself where that was central and important to me. And I mean, I think with the pandemic, we're seeing those things really become more of a priority. These lifestyle things are definitely more of a priority. I really encourage people, though, to not, like you said, don't be passive. Really get clear on where you want to end up, and then figure out how to get there.
Yeah. And speaking of the pandemic, I think you released your book around the time of the pandemic. So why do you think your book is so important at this time?
Well, I feel like the pandemic is a universal trauma that's happening to all of us. And it's really, we've been living in a shitstorm, I have to put it colloquially, over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote the book because I realized that the way I approached this situation was way different than the vast majority of society. There were all those news reports at the beginning of the pandemic of recycle bins full of wine and liquor bottles, of people just, eating a ton, gaining a lot of weight, drinking a lot, just completely self-soothing, not sure of how to handle this. And because of all the different life experiences I'd already had, all the trauma and difficulties I'd been through, I saw this as an opportunity again. I was like, okay, this is like the Great Depression. Over half of the Fortune 500 companies were founded during the Great Depression. This is one of those great historic moments in life that's full of opportunity. We're going to see so many amazing things come out of this time. So that's where my mind went. Then I went to there's all these people dying, et cetera. How do I protect my family? I immediately got on the knowledge side of that. How do we change our lifestyle, the way we're living, so we're interacting with people less, et cetera, et cetera. I realized that I had the tools to survive because I was already a survivor. And so I didn't experience the angst that other people did. I was almost like, bring it. Like, I've been through so much. This is just another thing to me. And I realized that attitude was different. And it was a gift that I could give to other people if I could walk them through how I arrived there. And that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, I think, wow, that's so impressive. And so I think powerfully needed during this time. And you're right. The pandemic is a universal trauma, universal grief that we're all going through. And I've seen people react to it in both ways. It can really bring out I don't want to say what our true character is, but it can really help us if we've got that resilience already. We can meet these things. As you said, what's the opportunity here? We can say, okay, well, now I'm isolated. I can't go see my friends, but maybe now I get to spend more time with my family.
Yeah.
And I know people that we're talking earlier about people that travel all the time. They didn't have to travel anymore for business. So they got to spend a year at home with their kids and stuff. So we can take anything and we can look at it, one way or the other.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Carrie, it's been really great talking to you about your book and everything. So tell people, I want to make sure people know that the name of your book and where they can get it and where they can reach you and all that kind of information.
Sure. So the book is Blooming: Finding Gifts in the Shit of Life, and it's by Carrington Smith. That's me. You can find it on Amazon.com, and it's available in paperback, hardback, and on Audible. So if you want to listen to it, it's actually me telling my personal stories. And you can find me on social media at Carrington ATX, which is for Austin, Texas. So at Carrington ATX on Instagram, Facebook, etc.
Nice. And your website?
It's carrington-smith.com.
All right, cool. Well, Carrie, again, really great meeting you. It's been an honor getting to know you a little bit better, and sharing our common past, and hopefully this will help somebody.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
All right. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, you too.
Don't forget to hit that big red subscribe button, and click the notify bell. Thanks for being here.